So the epoxy is all sanded off, and now I'm going to take a few shavings off the sole just to set the mouth, and I'm not there yet. It's just funny how it kind of happens, but it's just a hair. I've got a little bit to remove. I've got like 64th, just point, just a few shavings, just a little bit. That will just let it protrude, and I don't want it to just protrude either, so. I'm allowing the weight of the plane and really exaggerating my position on the tool, meaning that I'm really conscious that I'm not tipping the plane, ramping up or falling off. That's it. Well, yeah, I think that might be it. Good. So that all looks great. That's where I want that. At this stage, you want it to be pretty close to your final opening. And I like what I see with a very, very light projection. If I can get a super fine projection on the iron, just visually at this stage, of course, then I know I'm really close. And when I say really close, we're never taking that much off of these things, right? Keep that in mind. We're only still talking, you know, sitting on a 120 grit or 180 grit sandpaper or whatever it was, a medium to fine, really, not a super aggressive. And I'm slowly working this surface down until, you know, and that's as much for the epoxy as well as just keeping the entire bottom like a mirror at this stage, keeping that reference face and trying not to manipulate it in any way, because we took a long time to get it to this point. So all that to say, we'll be lapping it and getting our final shaving and tune-up, and that's after we get the wedge set. So at this stage, everything up to this point is kind of cosmetic, but still, again, trying to keep this reference face as we had it. So what is next? Big cuts. big, bold cuts. I'm just gonna take a big back saw, cut the end off of this. I'm gonna take a smaller back saw and just cross cut down to my witness lines, down to the pattern line. And then I'm going to borrow a quick wedge from one of my other wooden planes and just set the iron in the tool and then just see how it feels and starts to respond from there. After this is just big, rough cuts. So that's our next move. Now, the wedge, since we're talking about it, basically is that, right? That's the wedge from the Krenov. It just works. You can see where it hits, or maybe it was fit from bandsaw to sander. And it works, and that's the main part of this whole thing. We want it to work. But think about how our block came out of our plane. So I want the wedge shape to be somewhere right here for the continuity of my grain pattern, even though it's going this way and that kind of changes. But still, I have a choice here. What I don't want, and what you would never want, is to take your wedge along the grain this way. If you take the wedge across the grain this way, all these little grain fibers are short and they would easily break. So you want to make sure you're taking your wedge from the long grain side of your block. Now, in our case, we have a laminated bird's eye maple sole, which kind of, I suppose, now becomes kind of a defining or a very recognizable aspect about this tool. So that said, I want to incorporate some of that into my wedge, especially for this reason too. Now, walnut is a nice dense hardwood. It's not the hardest of the woods, but it holds up for something like this, where, you know, maybe it's not going to last 500 years in daily use, but it'll certainly last the rest of a lifetime, or 2, or maybe 3, especially, you know, you're not using them 8 hours a day every day. Anyhow, my bird's eye maple, and I was just sketching something, and I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to, for the longevity of this, under the brass pin here, I'm going to put a maple plate, essentially, in the top wear part, or at least a portion of the wear part on my wedge. It'll be a little decorative element, but it'll also have some utility in our case, because the bird's eye, the torrified bird's eye, is so dense. So back to our hand plane. What is the part we should be thinking about? Yeah, it's about tactile, it's about your feel, but we spend all this time on this profile here, but honestly, when am I ever really looking at that profile of this tool? Sure, I pick it up and I go, oh, that's kind of whatever, interesting. But when you trace this on a piece of paper, it may not be the most pleasing shape if you're just looking at a shape this way. What makes this plane unique, and why every time I pick it up, that magic is there for me? It's this way. It's the top. It's the front shape and the back shape of these tools. And I always said, this one feels very right-handed to me. Now, had I been left-handed, would I have found that sweet spot? I'm not sure. And it's very, very difficult to see any differences. But there are just a couple of little subtle things that I suspect when James made this, it was very quick, and after, it was just more intuitive than planned. It happened, and it definitely happens because he already worked this out a million times before. And just intuitively where things happen is this right hand on the back of the tool, left hand on the front. So, all that to say, instead of putting the plane this way and really always thinking about this, what this side, this looks great in your picture, but how often are you looking at your plane like this? And that's what so many people think about at this stage of the game, as opposed to the really important one is, what does the front feel like? What does this back shape feel like? And of course, I am going to take inspiration from the overall shape of this without, again, mimicking exactly this bandsaw shape. And how am I going to do that without just, again, I don't feel like I'm not trying to make a replica here. What I'm doing is being inspired by, through the overall dimensions. It's about the same length, it's about the same width, it'll be about the same height. The mouth opening is about the same spot. But there's not that much, what else could be possibly similar other than the care and attention, I hope, and I think, that the maker is putting into the tool. I think that's really the secret. We're gonna have some really nice things happening back here. That's careful. Careful grain selection. So just one last thing, I'm just going to take this small razor saw and I am going to put a few more relief cuts just in each side independently. Because again, the left and the right sides may not be the same, exactly the same anyway. And as I start chiseling this out, some relief cuts where the grain kind of comes downhill and then downhill. This is just a bit of insurance. Let's go there. Now on this side. Maybe some camellia oil. This is where I had put the joinery bench, as you can see. So right here in front of this window, looking out at the garden. Great spot. I haven't even worked over here yet. So this is a nice spot that I'm going to sit here. Not actually sit, stand, because it's the joinery bench. It's up high. And carve. So great spot to do that. You get some tools, because there's no tools over here. And wow, it's so quiet over here too. This might be a good spot for recording too. Doing some tracking. I have my computer over here. I mean, and when I say recording, I can, when I'm tapping the guitars. That would make more sense, wouldn't it? Extend it all the way out, put a drop there. Wow. That's what I was joking about on the Lee Nielsen when my frog, my adjusting knob was, and I said benchcraft it. Benchcraft it. There's some really nice hardware. And this is just the cast stuff, the inexpensive cast stuff. All the fancy, shiny, bright stuff is really nice too. That's great. Spoon gouge. This might be it's fairly wide. So my first move here is just bringing down all my relief cuts, carefully bringing down my relief cuts. I'm going down the grain, down the front slope, and then I'll turn it and come down the grain. And once that's done, then I can move on to my rasps and tools like that. If I need to, we'll see. I might just end up sticking with the carving tools. In fact, I probably will. back here. Kind of an unmistakable shape, isn't it? No matter what I'm going to do to it, everyone's going to go, hey, it's a Krenov plane. That's the way it should be. So what I've been doing for the last couple of minutes here is just holding the two side by side without measuring anything, noting where the shadows fall, where bevels kind of happen, and kind of giving myself a bit of a roadmap for what I want to do on this one. Noting like the shape of these big bevels in the back and how these buns fall, and then draw something similar in to where these lines kind of show me without again taking any measurements, but obviously mimicking, copying, being inspired by, whatever you want to call it. Just kind of rolling it all in. Because of course there are always going to be so many differences. So is it the same? Is it a copy of this plane? Not really. Not even close. How could it be, right? Okay, the wedge. Basically, I obviously have a reference right here for this wedge, but mine may be a little bit different than this one, obviously, because it's got to fit this pin and this body and this sole, on and on and on. This iron is the same as the one I'll be using here. At that point it is anyhow. So the wedge, I have a wedge out of one of my old smoothing planes that I can use as a ruler to tell me how thick our wedge needs to be at the point it passes under the pin. And right here I can see, wouldn't you know it, looks like about 3/16. Now the second measurement I want to know is how long the front of the wedge is at that point beyond the pin, because I don't want the wedge ending up sitting over the top of the chip breaker. So this distance, how far my wedge should go forward, is something you want to check on yours as well. So in our case, all things equal, This one's too long, just slightly. So I'm going to say this one should be somewhere about there for hours. So this one again is for a high angle smoothing plane I built. The Krenov, let's just see, just out of curiosity, I don't mind putting a little pencil line on it. Oh, it's way up. I'm not going to bother actually putting it on. Well, I can actually here. Now, mind you, that might be a little wider. Yeah. So his wedge is quite a bit. I'll line those two lines up right there. Sorry, right there. That's his on the left. So quite a bit shorter. Ours will split that difference. It's about 3/16 probably shorter than this one, and the front, just in the front. Now the back is subjective, and the back is another area open to much discussion. In my opinion, this one for sure is too small. The Krenov, I never have a hard time hitting it, so I'm going to take my cues somewhere off of this. You just basically want your wedge to be lower than the iron. You don't want to have to miss the wedge, hit the iron, or vice versa. You just want to easily be able to tap this and easily be able to tap that. So things to note, how it isn't touching on the back of the iron here. There's a little bit of space under here. So we'll take that into account. And again, I'm not going to take this and just trace this wedge, although I will reference it and be inspired by it and maybe freehand draw it from here to here. That's what I was going to say earlier. It's interesting when you just freehand something, and then if I were to take mine and trace it on paper and put this one on paper as well, how similar or how different are they? And the truth is at this stage, they're still quite a bit different, aren't they? So ours will definitely be inspired by. This part is flat. We have a shoe in the front, and we'll kind of curve up like that. Something around there. That's kind of the shape I'm going to go for. Now, I would like to, this is obviously our piece that we're going to use, and it is the offcut this way. So this is a little bit, just a hair, of course, wider than we want it to be, but it's easy to take that down later. So the top of my wedge is right here. So this will be kind of out of that. Now, in saying that, this is how long our wedge is. And this is how it'll be a little, like I said, narrower than this. Ooh. Something like that. Looking down at the top of our wedge this way, and I can also just take that speck, probably about there. So that's where the rise, this area here, my story stick will show me. So the rise is there. So that's about somewhere in this ballpark is where I want this curve to start happening here. Now, my actual pin falls about somewhere, it's actually from the front there. Our pin, right around here is where, this is about where the pin falls. So I would like to have an inlay from just under the arc here, the bend, I guess it would be more looking like this, of maple. Kind of like a wear strip, so the part that is engaging the pin is torrefied maple. But the rest of the body of the wedge is this piece of walnut. So from here to here, we'll have the bend up. And then from here to there, on the top anyway, this is what I would like to see. If this is about our halfway point, just have the maple kind of just come up at a bit of a peak, kind of like that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take our offcut of bird's eye maple. I'm going to cut this out of it. I'm going to inlay this into this. And then I'm going to make the wedge from that new piece of wood. Because why the hell not? So my inlay is not completely impossible to make. I'm going to think about everything very linearly. Is that the word? And we're going to say we need a finished height overall for the walnut body this way. That looks like if I go 3/4 is tons. So let's say 3/4. So we're coming up 3/4. This ruler happens to be 3/4. So there you go. Let's just do this. So we need a 3/4 inch piece of walnut overall. We need a piece of maple. Here, let's just take our overall kind of sort of lengths here. That's just for fun. There to about there-ish. So let's just square that up to our kind of sort of like that. That looks like about, let's call it about 2 1/4 heavy, 2 5/16. 2 5/16. Our maple inlay is going to be 1.5 inches on our scale here. So we're going to come in 1.5 inches. We're going to come down. We want a good 1/8 of an inch left over of our walnut sole, if you will. Actually, let's make it 1/4. Let's make it 3/16. Sure. 3/16. There to there. We install our piece of maple, which is, remember, from the top view, is not square, but it's still in there. And then we shape the plane, the wedge, from it. So hopefully our maple, we can, well, this is kind of the game, right? We can take a little off the walnut here, a little more off the maple here, until these two, I think the maple should stop before it gets to the end, maybe, we'll see. But back here is where the body, the block part will be of the wedge. And at this stage, this is going to be the maple wear strip inside the walnut. We'll have that much wear strip to work with, and there's our pin again. So now this is our maple inlaid into the walnut. Kind of, sort of. So about 3/4 of an inch. Off our reference face. here? Well, go figure. It's almost there to there. No, it is that. Isn't that funny how that worked out? That's if I just square off there to there. That's the piece we're looking for. So that becomes our blank. That's the top of the blank. So, you can see this. Hopefully you can see the cathedral shape. Kind of does this. So I'm going to turn this around. Now, can this be the front? I would rather this be the front. I want the grain to run downhill. So I'm thinking about my grain. Like that. Yeah, that kind of bends anyway up there. I would do like that, but that's going against the grain, and I am splitting hairs. That's my grain direction, I believe. So if I want the grain to go that way there, would it matter? So yeah, I'm carving it downhill this way. I want the grain running towards the bottom. So I want it to be that way, right? That way, yeah. I don't want it to run towards the bottom, so that means it's coming from this side. It's gotta come from here. This is my, oh, that's nice. There's lots of nice things happening right here. So that's where I'm taking it from, right? I want my grain to be running down. Huh, why does that look different on that side? It's running that way, right? And I want it to run down that way. It's going to be flat. Okay, that's going to change. Let me think here. Actually, no, I want it running uphill. I want it running that way up, so when I carve down it, yeah, that's the way. So this is the front. Okay, I'm glad we cleared that up. I'm glad we had this conversation. So we want to be on this side, which is where I thought in the beginning. So I'm just going to turn this a little bit, seeing as I can see this beautiful streak running up the middle there. I'm just going to see what happens when what would happen if I went over there, and then I almost lose all that. Over here, no, I like the streak. I'm going to put it right in the center, and I'm looking at the distance. Now the paper is my walnut, of course. I'm looking at the distance from here to this here, and from here to that side of that center grain. So that distance, here to here, and there to there. So I want to this way a touch. So I like it now better there to there. And at the top, well, it kind of gets organically, just kind of runs out there. But that distance and that distance are pretty symmetrical. These two distances are also, so that's where I want it. So we'll cut that off. A big rip cut here. A big rip cut here. Some shaping, fairing, all the while making sure I'm keeping this front edge of this new shape square up and down off of the reference, I guess this reference face here. That's my reference face. Why? Because then we're gonna cut this away and then remove almost all of it. So this shape may not be there anymore. So should we, well, no. That shape is definitely gonna be there. It goes all the way through. Is it gonna be as symmetrical as we were planning on? Well, actually, maybe I should think about that. My mortise can be here. My piece only has to be that big, and I can resaw this first. So my maple only needs to be 1/4 of an inch, give or take. Let's call it 5. Let's call it 3/8 to be on this side. So 3/8 instead of the half. What would that gain me? Yeah, I can do that. Oof. That's a nice cut. Horizontal, my vertical pencil lines are just nice reference for keeping things square-ish. It's a bit of extra work, but you know what? I think it'll be worth it. It'll be a nice touch. And a nice wedge with this torrefied maple wear bevel. It'll be kind of nice. So it's going to be inlaid up here, even though I'm not going to stop it. It just won't fill this cavity. It won't fill this space. But we do want to come down to full depth, correct? Yeah. So remember, here's my wedge. That's the inlaid maple, so the overall walnut, right? So that's correct. The overall maple. It's a little thinner than what I drew, but you get the idea. So, full depth. So I'm going to set, let me get some, where's this going? I set this line first, trusting my drawing, and that's more like a heavy 3/4. That's 13/16. 13/16 back from there. It's more like that line. I don't exactly know what we're doing. How wide are we? 1 8 9. So half an inch. Half inch plus 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. 30 seconds. That's my halfway point. It's the middle. Sorta. That works. Okay, a little double-sided tape. So I have a center line marked on the wedge. I have a center line marked on the bottom of the inlay. I'm going to double-sided tape that together and and then do a 10-second tidy, because this place is kind of a disaster all of a sudden. And then on we go. That's it.